So Sasha is a former pharmaceutical industry executive. She's owned and managed several contract research organizations, running clinical trials for over 60 international corporation businesses. She was born in Ukraine, moved to the United States in the late 90s, and holds an MBA from Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. She has, through her work after she retired, found out and researched deeply the irregularities involved in the documents that were behind the health security, HHS authorization or payment for Moderna and COVID-19 vaccines. And also...
Microphone closer.
Yeah. Sorry. And looked in great detail about how together with Catherine Watt, how the whole situation behind the vaccines were funded and legally supported or illegally supported. So she's going to present her findings as evidence that the US Human Health and Human Services had the intention to harm the human population. Welcome, Sasha. Is your mic on?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming here. It's a great audience. Thank you for inviting me to speak. My topic today is weaponization of healthcare by the global supranational crime cartel. And thank you to the previous speaker who described who those supranational cartel members are. They are private interests that have captured governments that we thought were sovereign governments, but no longer, because due to capture through these private interests, private-public partnerships, control of money flows, especially control of technology, those private interests captured our governments. And now we have this captured situation where the healthcare, something vital to us that we trust and believe in, has been militarized and turned against population in order to implement those goals of totalitarian control, reshaping of the whole society, and building this dystopian, in my opinion, Borg, or one brain, merging all the humans together. And also they are not shy about talking about their goals of reducing the global population. So we are walking into a crime scene, and the crime scene looks about like this, where this nice healthcare person is holding a murder weapon. We need to investigate it as a crime scene investigator would, starting from the murder weapon, from the poison shots. But before that, I'd like to introduce you to this idea of the kill box, something that my friend Catherine Watt talks about, and our mutual friend Todd Callender, also he's an attorney. It's a military term. The definition from the US Department of Defense Dictionary of Military and Associated Terminology, it means a three-dimensional space which military establishes, which coordinates, enables timely, effective coordination and control, and facilitates rapid attacks. And that's exactly what they have established for the entire world. We are living currently in a world that has been structured as a kill box, with all these levers pointed in the direction of both harming, eliminating, and terrorizing survivors. So let's start looking at it by investigating the murder weapons. And this is how I started researching this issue in early 2021, when these so-called vaccines were rolled out to the market. Also, as previous speakers noted, and all of you are aware, immediately after the rollout, there was a huge signal of injury and death. A lot of people died right away. For example, in VAERS, if you search today for the United States, there are over 4,000 reports of people dying on the same day they were injected, and 10,000 reports of people dying, including children, within 3 days of injection. And if you're telling me those people were so sick from COVID and otherwise had such a bad health status, were about to die, were within 3 days of death, which typically is very obvious, then what was the reason for injecting them? And if you have a coffee shop, a Starbucks, where over a period of about 18 months, 4,000 people go there and die on the same day. Wouldn't police investigate that Starbucks? Wouldn't that be interesting? For some reason, that was not interesting to our health authorities. Another point I noted, and I've presented this data before, I started looking not just at the signal of overall injury and death. What was interesting to me, because my background is in the pharmaceutical R&D, is I wanted to look at the data by lot number or batch number. Batch numbers exist on all sorts of consumer products and pharmaceuticals. If you buy a soda in a store and you open it up and it smells bad, well, don't drink that. But there's a lot number on the box and you can report it to the manufacturer. And the manufacturer, the reason those numbers exist, because those numbers are attached to information about where the product was processed, how it was made, where the raw materials came, which production lines, and by giving them that number, they can retrace it, they can find what happened, and they can then recall the lot from the market, and they can also correct the problem. This is how the system is supposed to function. So that's why I was looking at the lot numbers of these injections and adverse events and deaths reported for those lots by people who were injured and by family members of those who were dead.
Excuse me. Mm-hmm. This, can you just higher?
Higher? Like this? Okay. So this is the graph that I created at the time. On the y-axis, we have adverse events and deaths, serious adverse events and deaths only. I'm not showing all, but only serious. And then on the x-axis, all the lot numbers that we had verified with CDC for vaccines released in the United States, and this is Janssen, Moderna, and Pfizer. And I compared them to the historical data for flu vaccines, also arranged by lot numbers. And not all of the lot numbers are shown here because there's so many. And as you can see, flu vaccines were traditionally manufactured and within the constraints of the good manufacturing practices and generally following good manufacturing practices. Although today I don't recommend anyone taking any vaccines for anything because of the situation that's unfolding. But historically, I thought that that was representative of what a normal vaccine product would look like. And as you can see, the flu vaccine data, I couldn't even put it on the same graph. It was so tight, it was just lining up against the x-axis as a straight line. And all the COVID-19 injections, you can see the huge variability of those lots. Some of the lots were, few reports, 2, 3 reports, maybe 10, and some had thousands and hundreds of deaths in them. And those were enormous signals of this is not a safe product, this is nowhere close to pharmaceutical grade, nowhere close to good manufacturing practice compliant. And remember, the FDA mandate is, safety and efficacy is a non-binding recommendation from the FDA. What FDA exists to monitor is good manufacturing practice compliance and pharmaceutical grade standards. And if you cannot make something to pharmaceutical grade or good manufacturing practice compliant, that substance cannot be a medicine ever. So to me, this was immediately a signal that this is not a medicine, this is not manufactured as a medicine, this is something else. At the time, I met Craig Parody-Cooper, and we started together this website, How Bad Is Your Batch, or howbad.info. You can use this website if you don't know how to search VAERS data, for example. It's very convenient because you can go and type in a batch number, which they usually record on the vaccine card for those who receive these injections. And you can see how many adverse events and deaths that batch is associated with, and also compare it to others. This site is very basic, but it has a lot of good information, a lot of good analysis of this data. And as of late last year, it received over 100 million visitors worldwide, and it has become a really important resource to what we call red pill your friends and relatives and unbrainwash them from this delusion. So this is a very useful resource, and thanks to Craig for his wonderful work on it. Another type of analysis, this is early on, Craig also published this, and it's available on the website. What he was able to identify even more, concerning clustering of data. And this was clustering by alphabet, and this is example from Moderna. What he found is in the batch number, depending on what letter was in the middle of the batch code for Moderna, for example, here it's L, you could see that the death rates, now we're looking at death reports only for those lots, so the death rates were vastly different depending on the letter of the alphabet that was used in the batch code. So again, if it's the same product we're talking about, same formulation produced pharmaceutical grade, this should not exist. It shouldn't matter which letter stands in the batch code alphanumeric number of the vaccine injection lot, yet obviously it does make a huge difference. If you receive something with the K or an L, those are hugely toxic, deadly lots. And if you receive something with the G or H, wasn't very, very deadly, although there was some reports. So that was indicative that there was some intentional introduction of various levels of toxicity of the product, and in fact labeling them for, we sought further analysis of the data. Now, very recently on March 30th, a friend of ours, Max Schmeling from Denmark, published this analysis. We have talked to him and his colleagues over a year ago. So Max Schmeling is an economist and statistician from Denmark. He obtained data from Danish health authorities on adverse events and deaths by lot numbers. And he's done a wonderful analysis using machine learning to figure out other clusterings, abnormal data clusterings in those data sets. And he found some very interesting results. This is looking at Pfizer. Each dot is a batch or a lot, manufacturing lot. They are now represented, adjusted by this number of doses in those lots. And so on the x-axis, we have number of doses in each lot. And on the y-axis are adverse event reports. And as you can see, what he found is three different patterns of toxicity, completely different from each other. One hugely toxic with smaller lots. A middle one, the green dots, are sort of medium toxicity. And then the orange one is low toxicity. It's not zero, it's not quite placebo, because there will be a fourth one. So we have minimum 4 different patterns, because the fourth one wouldn't show up here. It's what we would call apparent placebo. It's when people don't report any adverse events at all, and so they would not end up in that database. And that explains to you the situation where majority of people who get injected, they think that we are conspiracies because, there are no effects. I didn't have any side effects. Everything was fine. Or my friend didn't have any side effects. And then we have those people who drop that on the day of injection, because obviously they have those different profiles included in what's supposed to be a single, well-produced, good manufacturing practice compliant product. So this is another evidence of intent to harm. Clearly, they have different formulations in these products. Another set of colleagues I have been interacting with are numerous numbers of researchers all over the world who are directly testing the product, directly testing the vials in different countries of different manufacturers. Now, I've explained before that the government's prohibiting to do this. U.S. government claims that they're all vials are government property, and if you do that, you are, stealing government property. Yet nobody has been prosecuted for doing this. Why? Because the criminals know that they don't want to own that those are their vials. So whoever picks them up and tests them, they're fine. So the numerous researchers have done this. One paper was published by David Hughes. It's a huge paper, over 100 pages, summarizing 26 different experiments by many groups in all 16 countries of the world, independent of each other. And that group found huge number of problematic things. For example, in some vials, RNA was found. but it's not conforming to the specification that it's supposed to be. So there's supposed to be a string of RNA code, a certain length. Nothing in the vial matched exactly that string. There were some bigger pieces floating around and a lot of small shards. And I explain it to people as if you break a big pane of glass, it breaks into large chunks and then very small shards. And this breakage is unpredictable, and this is exactly how RNA behaves. They cannot make it stable. They can, no matter what they do with it, modifications, all sorts of formulations, it still is not stable. It still breaks, and it breaks in unpredictable ways. And that's exactly what was found. There was RNA floating, but not conforming to specification. Another problematic thing was DNA was found in huge quantities and protein, and those are impurities. They're not supposed to be there at all. I'll cover it in more detail. There were toxic metals found, very, very consistent finding almost in every experiment. People were finding metals that are very problematic, should not be there, not on the label. Nobody can explain why they're there. And those are things like gadolinium, for example, or aluminum, very, very toxic, or cobalt and cesium. So why are they there? No idea. There is hydrogel. Pfizer substance is a hydrogel. And very likely it's what's called DARPA hydrogel or extracellular matrix hydrogel. They use it routinely in many applications in medicine, but for purposes of RNA, they typically load either naked RNA into this hydrogel or RNA encapsulated in lipid nanoparticles, and that makes it more stable and able to circulate longer in the body and produce more damage, I suppose. There are reports of possible graphene oxide, although those are really hard to confirm. It's very difficult setup and equipment that you need to have. It can be there both as intentional part of the hydrogel, for example, matrix, or as a contaminant coming from some manufacturing process. There are different objects found, blobs and fibers, and unexplainable phenomena. Also, I'm showing some pictures from another colleague, David Nixon in Australia. He's doing amazing microscopy experiments on these products, and he's published a lot of images. So these are very typical to be found this is Pfizer product under microscope. So very typical to be found. We don't know what they are. They may relate to this whole attempts to create, new neural network or new common brain or whatever these psychopaths dream up. None of it is functional. It's just basically garbage that gets injected into people and then creates injury, and sometimes the body can clear it and get rid of it. But that's how it looks under microscope, and we're finding similar structures in people's blood as well, especially those fibers. More recently, there was what's called Plasmid Gate on Twitter. This is a result of the experiments by Kevin McKernan in the USA. He published a very extensive paper of his results on preprint. And what he has done is he has a lab that does genomic sequencing. He's a genomics expert, and he's done genomic sequencing of several vials of Moderna and Pfizer, both bivalent and monovalent vaccines. And he found, and kind of is focusing on the contamination with DNA. So he found huge amounts of double-stranded DNA and plasmids contaminated in these vials, and they're up to 100 times or more over the acceptable limit. So the DNA in the vials, it's not supposed to be there. It's considered process-related impurity. It comes from the first step of manufacturing of RNA, where DNA matrix is made. It's kind of like a photonegative for print. So first DNA is produced, and then it's transcribed into RNA through a chemical synthesis. Now, the DNA is manufactured in E. coli cells by inserting plasmids. It's just little circular pieces of DNA with the particular code that they want into these E. coli in the vats, and they replicate quickly, and they incorporate these plasmids and replicate quickly. This is how you grow DNA. And then it's supposed to be harvested, purified, transcribed into RNA, again purified from all of this remainder of DNA But obviously that step fails. They don't purify it. And so this whole bunch of DNA with plasmids ends up all the way through in the vials and then gets injected in patients. What this means is that a person can receive some broken pieces of RNA coding for God knows what, and then all this DNA with plasmids. And what it means is replication capable. So the plasmids can now infect human cells. They can also infect your gut bacteria cells and then start replicating there. And so that can cause dysbiosis, sepsis, and guess what? They also have code for antibiotic resistance because this is part of manufacturing process. They have to code them with antibiotic resistance genes. And so now we have people being infected with these plasmids. Their gut bacteria infected with plasmids that are antibiotic resistant, and that can cause sepsis. And we've seen a lot of reports of sudden sepsis, very severe, antibiotic resistant, wounds that don't heal, infections that don't heal, again, antibiotic resistance. So, and also there is a mechanism of inducing cancers or making existing cancers worse and more rapid. So all of this was found by these experiments and now completely confirmed that all of these vials are contaminated. And I looked up the vials that Kevin tested. And so for the monovalent Pfizer, he tested 8 vials. All 8 were contaminated with DNA and plasmids. I looked up the lot that he was using. All of them came from lot FL8095. And I found that this was targeted at children. And as of today, at least 1 child died within 2 days of being injected, a 10-year-old. And 1,200 children were injured by this particular lot. So we have the smoking gun evidence that all these garbage, contaminated, poorly made, unpredictable substances get injected and they kill and injure children. And with all of this evidence, our health authorities are coming back to us and saying, oh, no, it's safe and effective. So gaslighting is incredible. They see all this, they have all this data, they look at it, they see the dead children, and they come back to you and say, no, it's safe and effective. So my question was always, how is this possible to happen? So I've been doing that research for about 1.5 years or 2 years, and I cannot understand why nobody can prosecute the manufacturers for these huge and obvious violations, and why are all the FDA has a lot of enforcement power, and so do all the other regulators. Why are they not doing anything? And the explanation came to me when I met my friend and colleague, Catherine Watt, who is also writing on Substack under Bailiwick News. I highly recommend everyone subscribing to her. So she's a paralegal and a writer, and retraced a lot of legal history of how this was structured and organized. Now, so to me, it was a big aha moment. It answered my question. Why is everyone allowed to behave this way? Why are manufacturers allowed to put highly poisonous substances on the market and force it on everyone? And the regulators and government authorities do nothing, in fact, actually help and encourage and gaslight everyone. And that is basically the premise of the weaponization of healthcare, of taking something that we trust and rely on and are vital to our living and turning it on us by lies. So let's look at that in more detail in the legal structure of this crime. But before we go there, let's talk about bioweapons. This term is discussed, and people think it's some sort of conspiratorial. And if you bring up a bioweapon word, oh, you're crazy. You're just, you're just one of them. The nuts, the conspiracists who are talking about this. Well, actually, it's not very conspiratorial because I found many reports and books and textbooks discussing these issues. And so this is one of the examples. It's an Air Force report that I have. They're all in public domain. That discusses this Jason group, which is another think tank and advisory to the US government of scientists that met in 1997, and they were discussing types of bioweapons. Well, bioweapons, actually, it's an ancient type of warfare. It's been used since forever. But in the more recent years, it became more technological. And so from around 60s, there were a lot of discussion about it. And so in 97, this group met and provided a report to the US government and US military discussing different types of bioweapons. They've characterized about 6 different groups of bioweapons, and one of them was gene therapy as a weapon. So gene therapy as a weapon has been known by bioweapon class. Typically what this, the cabal of military scientists and industrial complex, they walk around and they say, oh, we're investing in this technology because it's going to revolutionize medicine. We're going to be able to code all the defective genes and recode them and fix all your problems and, fix your insulin production and cure cancer and cure cystic fibrosis. This is just so amazing and wonderful. And it never, ever materializes. What instead happens is all that research goes into the other side of it, of the dual-purpose technology. It goes into the weaponization goals. And the same group said, yeah, you can potentially cure cancer with this, but guess what? You can also very easily use the same technology to subvert it and insert pathogenic genes into those substances, into those codes. And how would you know? How would you know if the one letter of the code is changed and it becomes pathogenic? You don't know. So this is a dual-use technology. Known bioweapon has been discussed for a long time. And in fact, there is a bioweapons convention, the international one, in force since 1975. But it's widely considered very weak mechanism. It has really no enforcement. US has consistently resisted any attempts at creating some sort of verification that your biological research and development activities are not, in fact, for weapons, but in fact for legitimate needs. But US always shut down those attempts. Now there is also a reality to this that it's actually nearly impossible to verify whether an academic lab is really doing legitimate research or doing something weaponizable because of the nature of this type of research and development. So there are practical difficulties in monitoring all that. And in reality, they just continue without any checking. Now, the U.S. government and its military, of course, they're brilliant because they just rename things and continue doing exactly the same thing that was prohibited by the international laws. So in this case, they renamed bioweapons into military prototype countermeasures. So this is the terminology that they use in a lot of contracts and documents and how they structure this whole thing. What is military prototype countermeasure? Well, we don't know. Anything can be a countermeasure. A lock on the door can be a countermeasure against somebody breaking in. So it's a very fuzzy term, has really no definition. And within that term, they can hide a lot of things. So the military in the US also uses contracting mechanism, and I know it exists in other countries as well. It's called Other Transaction Authority. This is just a piece of US law that's quoted here. And this Other Transaction Authority contracting mechanism essentially legalized the Department of Defense contracting with pharmaceutical companies who are regulated. So when they're private pharmaceutical manufacturers, they're regulated. But in this Other Transaction Authority contracting, the Department of Defense can order things from them that bypass all those regulations because of the contracting framework is used. And so also in the same law, it says that, well, the US Department of Defense can carry out prototype projects that are directly relevant to enhancing effectiveness of military personnel, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of words that mean absolutely nothing. And they just say the Department of Defense can order stuff that they think that they need from regulated entities by passing regulations. What it means is they can hide weapons here. Essentially, the OTA program renamed biological, chemical, radiological, nuclear weapons as qualified countermeasures, medical countermeasures, and security countermeasures. So very, very simple trick. We just rename it and continue doing it even though it's prohibited. Now, they also figured out how to eliminate safety and efficacy standards for pharmaceutical products. And this is the framework, again, Catherine Watt identified. This is in the US law, and it says that if you use emergency use authorized medical countermeasures, then once they're designated as such by Health and Human Services Secretary under public health emergency, then that is not a clinical investigation. And if something cannot be a clinical investigational product, then it cannot be a pharmaceutical by definition. So in this framework, 3 things need to happen. We need to have public health emergency. We need to have emergency use authorized countermeasures, and we contract them through this OTA framework. And that creates this sort of, these 3 things create this extrajudicial space where now they can do whatever they like. They can produce biological weapons, chemical weapons, distribute them onto the people, force them onto people, kill and injure everyone, and none of it is regulated. None of it is supposed to comply with FDA rules. And when you try to complain, you get pushed into this extrajudicial space, which is also covered by the PrEP Act, and they protect themselves from all liabilities. So it's absolutely beautiful. Now, who are those dictators that deploy these weapons? Under Trump, the Health and Human Services Secretary was Alex Azar. Under Biden, currently it's Javier Becerra. They become kind of a de facto dictator because HHS announces public health emergency. Then these guys by themselves decide which countermeasures, meaning weapons, are going to be deployed. And there's no criteria that they need to go by. There's no FDA approval or clinical trials. In the way this law is written, it's basically this person can look at that data, but they don't have to use the data for their decision, and then they can decide to deploy the weapons. So it's up to Alex Azar or Javier Becerra currently to deploy the injections on the market and any other so-called COVID countermeasures and continue deploying them forever. So finally, to summarize, so this is the framework that they use. These 3 things need to happen: emergency use authorization, other transaction authority, and then under public health emergency, with the PrEP Act, they can basically continue doing this, continue implementing this crime forever. It's not judicially reviewable. Nobody can stop them. Only HHS themselves can stop it, but why would they? They can continue with their crime. So what happened when this thing clicked in place in 2020? Obviously, you remember there was Operation Warp Speed started, announced by Trump administration. And it was advertised to us as, it's just military helping with logistics and delivering these products. But in reality, when I looked at the documents of Operation Warp Speed, this is their own slide from October 22, 2020, meeting and presentation at the COVID-19 vaccine development vaccine advisory committee meeting at the FDA. And so this organizational chart, as you can see, it's turned on the side. It's a little bit confusing presentation. So it's turned on the side, but when you look at the top of the chart, who is at the top of the chart? We have Department of Defense as a chief operating officer. So I was like, wait, they told us they're just logistics. No, they're not logistics. They're in charge of the whole thing. Chief operating officer. And the HHS, where FDA sits, is chief science advisor, so it's advisory role. And then at the top here, you have this executive structure, which is all US government, National Security Council, Department of Defense, BARDA, DARPA, NIH, all these CDC agencies. And they do everything from the executive level, meaning they design the clinical trials, they design the manufacturing flow, they do plans, operations, analysis, or they do distribution, they execute clinical trials. They do also security, legislative affairs, so they interact with Congress. They do finance, of course. and Office of General Counsel, which happens to be, because this is the US government, that's the Department of Justice, is their main lawyer. Okay, and then under that structure, we have all the pharma companies and medical device companies, whoever received orders and money for making these poisons. Well, they are clearly not in charge. They're third level down, but they're receiving huge amounts of money, so they're very happy and they shut up and follow the orders. And in fact, it explicitly says in their contracts that as long as they follow the orders themselves and anyone who they hire as a contractor along the supply, manufacturing, distribution chain, regardless of their status, whether they're government or private employees, they're all considered government employees for the purposes of this exercise, and they're all jointly covered by the PrEP Act and protected from all liability. They're the covered person. And so as long as they just follow the orders and get the shots to the people and deliver the shots into the people, they're completely protected. That's how the contracts are written. So just follow the orders, shut up, do your job, don't ask any questions. So who's really making these injections?
Could you please talk a bit slower? It's very difficult to follow.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So who's really manufacturing these products? Is it pharmaceutical companies, or is it the U.S. government and its military, commandeering the pharma companies? So that's a big question. And obviously, they distributed huge amounts of money through this mechanism to the companies, and all of this hinges on a pile of money made available for this effort, and it's called, COVID response. U.S. government actually created, we say printed, but they didn't print their digital money. They printed huge amounts of money. They distributed $47 billion to the vaccine manufacturing, to the pharmaceutical companies, and recently Biden administration renamed Operation Warp Speed into Next Gen and added another $5 billion to this exercise. They're manufactured by the network of established Department of Defense manufacturers on the right-hand side. They're called vaccine supporting efforts. Everything that has been ordered from pharma companies, such as Moderna, Pfizer, and so forth, is called a demonstration. So because they need to call it demonstration to use other transaction authority and hide that they're making weapons. And another thing is all the contracts for vaccines are from the Department of Defense, from the Army. This is Pfizer contract. It says the scope of it is large-scale manufacturing demonstration again. And then when we FOIA them, we receive these hugely redacted contracts where we don't know what they say. But interestingly, you see the black boxes and their redactions. And they're very typically, most of the time, actually 100% of the time, they're B6 and B4. Okay, so B6, and this is the name of the person who's redacted, it stands for disclosure of information that would cause serious harm to relations between the United States and a foreign government. And this one is even more interesting, B4, and this is all over the place. Disclosure of information that would affect the application of advanced technology in a US weapons system. I mean, you tell me why they use that redaction. Now, so finally, I want to talk about fear. So all of this hinges on fear, and the previous speaker covered it really well. They really do want you to be scared of the viruses and pandemics and so forth, because so that you comply with all this nonsense. Okay, so I just want to play this clip. I hope it's going to play.
They wanted to propagandize specifically viral pandemics.
Yes.
Through media, through Hollywood, Netflix shows, books, publications.
And through test runs, like
test runs.
SARS-1 in 2003, H1N1 in 2009.
In a remote African jungle.
And then they would have these old stories about Ebola in Africa,
Yep.
constantly barraging people with that idea.
A small monkey is captured, bound for a pet store in America. The animal carries a deadly virus.
Now, I know that some of us have doubts about what we're about to do. We'd be less than human if we didn't. But the fate of the nation, perhaps the world, is in our hands. We cannot, we dare not refuse this burden. I'm confident that each of you will do his duty. God forgive us.
Your town is being quarantined.
We got 19 dead. You got 100 more infected. It's spreading like a brush fire.
What are you talking about?
If one of them's got it, then 10 of them have got it now. And if one of them gets out of Cedar Creek, we have a very interesting problem.
If that bug gets out of there, 260 million Americans will be dead or dying.
I'm leaving with the team in an hour.
From the heart of a small California town.
Damn it, Sam, I want to save these people same as you.
To the inner circle of power in Washington.
The most optimistic projection for the spread of the virus is this: 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours.
The greatest medical crisis of all time.
We can't stop it.
Begins.
Try to remain calm.
Many people are dying and are going to continue to die unless we find this monkey.
So they wanted that image of scary, scary virus that causes a pandemic that kills half of the world's population, which is total nonsense scientifically, I can assure you.
I think the information one is the very, very, very primary one, because they need absolute control of the information to maintain the fear levels at the levels the fear has to be at to maintain all the other controls. And as soon as people have information about who is doing what and what it is that they're doing, they get less afraid.
Yeah. So as my friend Catherine said, basically they want you to be afraid, and the movie, the clip of the movie is from 1995. But I mean, I'm sure you've seen a whole bunch of shows and movies and games and things like that that have propaganda of viruses in them. So start recognizing that propaganda and questioning it, and that's how we get out of the kill box. Don't follow government propaganda. Don't be afraid of it. Live a healthy lifestyle. Eat and exercise. Hug your loved ones. Don't isolate. Exit all these globalist institutions. Refuse all vaccines and refuse all those injections, especially when they're qualified medical, military, whatever. And push for alternative decentralized financial systems, push for decentralized all sorts of systems, because as you've seen, they're trying to build a central matrix of control. And basically, whatever globalists don't like, do more of it and harder.